Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, October 3rd, starting a little bit later today. We have a note here saying regarding the new season of Ranked Duels, so I wonder if anything actually changed or if this is just the same old, same old. It seems like it's pretty much the same old, except for, yeah, doesn't seem like anything changed here. So it's with the exception of the season number and the date changing, they just copied and pasted the last month's notification. It's ridiculous that we're at season 10 because basically it's been 10 months since this game has come out, and it's reminiscent of the sloppy numbering system I have as far as series on my own YouTube channel that at this point really doesn't mean much of anything, because I'm at like series, I may be up to 40s or 50s, and all that means is that there was a general collection of a few shows in a series that aired at the same time or were recorded at the same time. Do we even have a Duel Live to do? Yes we do, so it has already rolled over into that. I still find it very weird to get Duel Links advertisements here. At what point, if they're willing to advertise other Yu-Gi-Oh games, at what point are we going to just see other Bandai or Konami, whatever company owns Yu-Gi-Oh properties in these advertisements? Are we going to start to really just get advertisements for all kinds of games in some kind of ridiculous way? Alright, well, we're down to silver 5. There's nothing else to really do, so we will change the decks back to Floander, and we'll hope Floander at this new season, with maybe the meta changing a little bit over the new season, wins. And if it doesn't win for a long enough period of time, I'm going to probably get upset with it and stop playing Floander and just go back to Zodiac, which then I probably will find Zodiac also doesn't particularly win. Over the weekend for the accountability section, I was pretty hardcore into just playing Zero Time Dilemma and pretty much nothing else. Like, I have adopted watching a lot of Archer on Hulu, and one thing I'll say about Archer is that they really made a mistake, I think, in not having episodes of the week or Monsters of the Week type episodes. They go 2, maybe 3 seasons where Archer really is just a spy and in a spy organization, and then they get bored with that, and then they're doing this Vice story arc where it turns out they were never authorized by the US government to be a spy organization, and now they're just trying to sell a bunch of drugs to be like cocaine drug lords. And all of those, as you watch the arch, are decent kind of like cutaway gags and such, but if you compared it to something like Family Guy or Simpsons, the resolution of the narrative is resolved at the end of each episode in Family Guy and Simpsons, for the most part. Simpsons in particular, almost always. Whereas there's just a connected, continued storyline happening in Archer, and you have to assume that's because it was on FX instead of getting a higher budget of being on Fox. On top of which, they also have completely gotten away from that first episode as far as being really willing to show toplessness and or bare bottoms. That they'll show butt cheeks still, but there's always a conveniently placed ping pong paddle in front of a butthole, or and So yeah, anything extreme you may really have gotten from being on FX, they really lost by the time they're in the 4th or 5th season, because FX really doesn't let you go that extreme either. Like, extended cable lets you go a little bit far, but it's hardly an adult channel that allows it. There really isn't any cussing at all in Archer, and never really was. But yeah, I think the foundation in which Archer is made, and I don't know why I'm really talking about Archer other than I'm watching a lot of it and just want to talk about it. The foundation that is made on hurt it, in that it was an extended cable channel that had more limited budget and didn't have that as much pressure to release on a weekly basis all the time. But then again, if it was just like Simpsons, it would have gone longer, but would have been better, or would have just become bland. Like, it's hard to tell. But I definitely would say that they failed to just kind of have an enemy of the week. They start with kind of that, like having the Russians be the bad guys in the first season, and then like the Yakuza being the bad guys, and really trying to just like have a ethnic stereotype or mafioso stereotype be a bad guy for a few times, but then they fairly quickly just focus in on the Russians, and they're the only bad guys in the story. So much so that there's like no real bad guy as far as like a Italian mafioso group in the story at all. Like not a single like mafia movie parodies, but you'd almost certainly assume that there would be something like that in some episode, in those early episodes of Archer, as far as a spy organization. I don't know if there's really any Irish gangs. They never touch upon any kind of like inner city Bloods versus Crips gangs as far as how a spy organization might interact with that. They don't interact with countries at all other than Russia, so there's no like North Korean spies, except for like in one episode where that could have been multiple episodes in which you're dealing with Koreans. Like they seem to be unwilling to parody or stereotype pretty much anybody in a funny way. I guess Archer maybe was trying to be what an old school woke would have been, to its own detriment. When you look at how spy shows and spy stories go, though, is that you are always playing into the stereotypes. Look at the old James Bond movies, and you fall into that, and you do have just like the Russians be these big, strong, blonde-haired monsters, and you certainly have a lot of that. And at some point, if I guess James Bond movies weren't evolving, people would go back and try and cancel some of the old James Bond movies. Like pretty much all forms of entertainment had those kinds of stereotypical depictions. And if you're going to lean into a spy cartoon, you kind of have to lean into what people would have remembered. But they didn't do that, so they ran out of ideas in their episodes, and that kills Archer. It killed Archer for me in the long run, because at some point in the later seasons, Archer straight up goes into a coma and is basically either near death or dead in his original timeline. So you don't have like any connection to the buildup of season after season. Is somewhere around season 6, 7, 8 of Archer, like everything just gets thrown out the window. So even the continued narrative gets lost at that point. And so that's when I was originally watching Archer, I just tuned out completely. That on top of the fact that it was definitely taking them a lot longer to make episodes than it was worth sticking to. Which, when you look at something like Rick and Morty, that has that same problem where Rick and Morty is telling, particularly after its first season, a fairly connected storyline with basically 1, maybe 2 episodes per season not being in some way connected to the main storyline, and it doesn't have enough episodes, and it can't make episodes fast enough. So yeah, if you were going to, if you had a cable channel and you were going to make something like Archer or Rick and Morty, you basically, I think, need to have 2, maybe 3 teams animating and writing stories, and just like have an A team and a B team, and have a general director or producer above them so that the stories somewhat connect. But you probably can't have a single group of people, of creatives, overseeing every single episode. You need probably a writing room where people pitch ideas and every idea eventually gets accepted and used. Probably shouldn't have bothered to get a second copy of that. There was something else I was gonna say. Oh yeah, talking about actual video games and alternate timelines, since I mentioned that. Yeah, the Zero Time Dilemma as a game. That was stupid. Why did I activate that? Like, as an actual game, it is oddly a little bit improved compared to the Virtue's Last Reward game, which was the second game in the non-owning series. But I don't know if it's quite improved enough. Like, ideally, I would like Zero Time Dilemma to get rid of all of its escape rooms and just show me story and voiced cutscenes. So basically, I'd just like the series to have been an anime. And I kind of would have preferred it to have no reoccurring characters, and definitely none of the reoccurring plot lines of the 2 previous non-re games. But that's all squished in, which just overly complicates everything and just makes the story far too weird, far too sci-fi for its own good. Suspending my disbelief for 1 or 2 premises is something I can do. Suspending my disbelief for 5 or 6 sci-fi premises is crazy, because you have one disease, and then you have another disease called Radical 6 that's a virus, and then you have a like 3rd disease that is mentioned called, I think, FBR, that maybe isn't even real, and then you have time travel via 2 different conveyances, which is insane. And then you have morphogenetic fields, which means you can send your memories to somebody in the past. Which, yeah, that's really just touching the tip of the iceberg as far as all the crazy things that possibly exist around here. It is just a lot. It really is just a little too much for a game. And it does seem like the game is a little bit accelerated in its branching storylines in Zero Time Dilemma compared to the previous games, so I may not do as much grinding as before, but there's still a lot of grinding. There's still a lot of kind of randomness. Like, there definitely are some scenarios where you're flipping a coin or doing the equivalent of flipping a coin, and the game internally is just internally flipping a coin. So you have to just jump back to that memory and try again to see if the coin lands on the other way. But unfortunately, there's also a sequence where you have to roll 3 dice and get all ones, which the odds of that happening are incredibly low, so there has to be some internal game mechanism at some point where you're going to be able to actively change the odds of that dice roll, or you're going to find loaded dice. But yeah, it's still got some problems, and I still think at the end, as I'm approaching the final act, they could add a bunch of extra content. I guess maybe this guy's playing a ghost trick deck. I could imagine them I could imagine Zero Time Dilemma adding a whole bunch of extra content at the end like the first game did, and then there being 6, 7, 8 hours of extra stuff. Hit that. And I seriously doubt the narrative is going to be done well. Inherently, part of the problem with Zero Time Dilemma is it sells itself like a Saw movie. There really are no death traps in the game. There's like one that is kind of a death trap, but really everything else is more of a mathematical Monty Hall like problem. Where these are kind of known, these are either variants on fairly well-known mathematical what are your odds, what should you do based on odds problems, or they are just straight up copies of that. Whereas a jigsaw puzzle a jigsaw trap would be much closer to something that was like a Zero Time Dilemma, in that you would actively have very little time to decide to saw off your leg to escape a room before the door locks forever. So it sells itself dishonestly, and then the actual product it gives you in the actual gameplay is pretty awful. It definitely is a game that looks like it was on the Nintendo DS or 3DS. So it's very low polygon. It really isn't a game that you probably would engage with if you hadn't, for some reason, many years earlier, engaged with 999. But yeah, it really isn't in a bad formula. If you took the events of the three games, 999, Virtue's Last Reward, and Zero Time Dilemma, and just reanimated that into an anime series, you might have a decent storyline there. But honestly, I don't think you would even have a great storyline there either, because the story is crazy and muddled. It feels like it's written by somebody with severe attention deficits, ADD, ADHD, because it's just jumping all over the place. What does this card actually do? Let's not activate that quite yet. So yeah, it's too anime for even anime as a story, in my opinion. It throws out ideas that you might see in something like a Stephen King novel that was super long, like The Stand. Almost certainly in The Stand novel, if I actually had read it, there would have been entire paragraphs or even chapters around the idea of red herring theories, but then you would either drop those red herring theories, or it would be proven that those red herring theories are are not accurate, and then you would eliminate that from the story, and that would be a nice little journey. In the nonary games, the red herring theories get introduced, and then they turn out to be true, and then another red herring theory gets introduced, and it turns out to be true. So it's just a game full of every theory is true, and that's muddled, to say the least. I guess in a lot of ways, though, there isn't a lot to say about Zero Time Dilemma, because you won't really understand it at all unless you played the two previous nonary games. In a lot of ways, Zero Time Dilemma is trying to better wrap up the endings of the two previous games, I think, and some of the false endings and the false branch timelines. But yeah, you really won't understand it, and you really wouldn't care about it unless you played the previous games. And so, to wrap up my rambling here about a game that most people shouldn't play and won't play, my concern would be when I get around to playing Danganronpa 2, whether there will be that much of a connected narrative between Danganronpa 1 and Danganronpa 2. I want there to be a little bit of a connected thread, but I don't want to have to get extra contextualization of the first game and find out secrets. There definitely are some characters, and this is another problem with Zero Time Dilemma. There's definitely some characters in Danganronpa that you actually care about and would want to know more about, whereas the characters in the nonary games, you kind of don't. I personally kind of don't care about any of the characters, so seeing returning characters doesn't make a lot of sense. There was a character named Lotus that was in the first two games that was just the cheesecake anime girl with a lot of cleavage showing. And visually, her returning in the second game was interesting, but personality-wise, I didn't care about her at all. And the cheesecake girl character in the third game is a new character, but she's what may be an attempt at being visually iconic personality-wise. She's not really anybody that you would want to love. None of the male characters have enough backstory or characterization. I just don't think the writer of these games actually knows how to write people, and that's really hurting the narrative there. He really does not come off as somebody that knows how to write human beings so much and conversations. Instead, he writes mathematical problems and high sci-fi stuff. It comes off as, I mean, I'm not going to actually accuse him of being autistic, but it comes off as somebody who doesn't have a lot of social skills. Which is funny because two of the characters in Zero Time Dilemma very noticeably don't have any social skills and are written somewhat well, in my opinion, as characters that don't have social skills. But yeah, let's move forward with the news. There's still a lot of Zero Time Dilemma that I need to play. The clock is ticking in general, always. So, like, the one thing I needed to do over this weekend was get the YouTube Shorts scheduled, and I didn't do that. So, that's a problem, certainly. Oh, it's my turn. I need to actually play. I was thinking something would activate there, but nope. Well, then I've screwed myself up. Feels like every time a minute passes, there should be some sound effect that plays on the clock. Just a little tick, just so you can audio-wise get a reminder. But yeah. We may not have a story today, but I will go from my other sources. Chaos Head Noah has come out and said that there was some part of the content that Spike Chunsoft was not willing to censor or edit out to get the game on Steam. Like, so we have confirmation. Let me just double check. It was Steam. Yeah. Let me see if I can get a direct quote that I could read out here. Spike Chunsoft Incorporated today regrets to announce it will not be able to release Chaos Head Noah on Steam as originally planned due to Steam's guideline required changes to the game's content. Spike Chunsoft believes these changes would not allow the game to be released to its standards. Blah 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 blah. The bottom here says, please rest assured the Nintendo Switch version is not affected and will release October 7th as scheduled. In late August, it was noticed that Chaos Head Noah's Steam page was removed. It was also previously revealed that the Switch version is also technically censored as it does not contain Sierra's, that's SEIRA swimsuit. The swimsuit costume DLC. But if it was just a thing that the swimsuit costume DLC itself was the problem, then they almost certainly would still have listed it on Steam. The screenshot of Chaos Head Noah that I'm looking at is not really even a moe art style. It's actually kind of a stretched out, elongated anime girl art style. They are in school uniforms, so that does mean that you can either claim they're in college or high school or junior high, as far as the way the outfits are. They're holding weapons. I wouldn't be surprised if there's actually just a significant amount of violence and blood that for some reason Steam is saying no to. And this is Spike Chunsoft saying it, so at this point you kind of have to believe that Steam is censoring Eastern games on an unfair basis compared to what it's not censoring on anybody on Western games. The other story that we probably won't have an article around is that apparently, according to Gamuzzi, Gamuzumi, Nintendo is no longer allowing uncensored breasts in their digital games, which at a certain level you would have, if you weren't paying attention, you would have assumed Nintendo was never allowing uncensored breasts in the download digital games, but that's actually not true. Nintendo has been oddly the least censorious of the three consoles lately, and they were allowing that. This Gamuzumi game that they were trying to get as a digital game on Switch was a pretty generic, ugly looking shoot 'em up game with anime girls, not even, kind of like 90s style anime characters. Definitely looks more like adult women than girls, even though I just said girls. And they have like tentacles over the image, and maybe as you play through the game the tentacles retract and you can see an image of some toplessness. Not really showing a lot there. But we continue down this path of censorship, certainly. So there's basically no platform now where an adult can enjoy adult material without jumping to some weird third-party website that is going to sell you maybe 20 things full of a bunch of microtransactions, like Nutaku, I guess, being a good example of an adult-only web storefront, and Nutaku does just not have enough games on it, on its own storefront. There really is a gap in the market there, where if Nutaku opened itself up kind of like Steam and let people pay $100 to do a Steam Direct, you would probably see a major influx of things that they could host. But yeah, censorship seems to be winning more and more these days, and the pushback to it seems to be fewer and fewer. And certainly I can understand why people aren't enraged and protesting in the streets like they probably should be doing when there's just so many other things going on. I just saw something in the news right before I streamed that there's now speculation that the Supreme Court, after overturning Roe versus Wade, is going to try and just unilaterally overturn the Voting Rights Act, which I don't even know what the Voting Rights Act specifically protects in part, but almost certainly it means minorities of some sort are going to have a harder time voting, and Republicans will get more Republican votes that way. It means voter suppression one way or the other, because they wouldn't do it unless it was to support the Republicans. And I don't want to get into a long political argument, or any political argument at all, but yeah. So there are bigger things in the real world, is my main point, that people should be up in arms with, but meanwhile the small things are getting ignored and everybody is getting away with everything. Getting quickly back to the Video Games Chronicle articles, we had already mention this, but there was a delay, and I'm not sure if there was ever an update as far as the physical versions of Bayonetta being Bayonetta 1 for Switch being delayed in Europe. Like, it doesn't seem like there is an update here, so this is just that same article. So it could have been delayed just a couple days and it could be out now. Or it could be something else. I don't know why specifically Video Games Chronicles articles are overlapping as much as they are. I kind of think it's because they changed their website, or they're just flagging a couple of articles to come back, because we talked about Microsoft filing its case for the Activision acquisition with the EU competitive regulator too, and a lot of this news like this is not really actionable news. Stadia announced it was giving up the ghost. I saw one article saying Stadia failed because nobody trusted Google, when I think a lot of people would say Stadia failed because Google doesn't trust Google, and the way Google does its business, it doesn't stick with things long enough. Because this was totally on Stadia's call. Like, Google could have said, Stadia is here for 10 years no matter what. We're just going to stick with it. We don't care if we lose $1 billion in the process. This technology is good. This is the way of the future. This supports our Chromecasts, and we're not giving up Chromecast. That does certainly bring about a question about whether we are going to start to see either Chromecast being built into devices that are so weak that they couldn't have handled actually doing the streaming of Stadia games, or whether we're just going to see the Chromecast die next. But yeah, it was totally on Google's hands and Google shareholders' hands. This specific article just says Ubisoft, Bungie, and IO confirm its Stadia salvage plans, which this is the information players really would need. Let's see, as far as Ubisoft Plus subscribers, they'll have more information. Bungie has begun conversations as far as Destiny 2 players on Stadia. And then IO Interactive said it will is also looking at the possibility of salvaging the Stadia accounts. So you have like 3 companies in which you could have bought games on Stadia, and now either of those companies are going to look awful because they're just going to say, well, you lost these accounts completely, or they're going to have to bite the bullet and give out different free accounts or transfer accounts over. Probably just try and transfer accounts over. And Ubisoft can transfer everybody over to Uplay and not really cost themselves too much doing that. But Bungie is almost certainly going to have to give out Steam accounts, Steam keys, because there's not... well, yeah, Destiny, what else would Destiny be on but other than Steam that they could give it to or would want to give it to? And then IO Interactive is in the same boat, where you would have to assume it's Steam keys. And I don't think anybody is profiting particularly well from this idea of Stadia being shut down, because I don't think anybody was really getting free games on Stadia anyways. Meanwhile, there's now going to be a bunch of Stadia controllers that are close to e-waste. There's some arguments that it did work with Bluetooth. I've seen people say that, but I've also seen people say that actually no, it doesn't work, and so you would need to write drivers or open source the drivers, because the Stadia controllers in particular were fairly weird in that they were both connecting via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi at the same time, sending the commands, I think, for the most part, directly through the internet and through a Wi-Fi connection to the Stadia servers, and the Bluetooth connectivity really probably was very minimal in what it was doing, directly connecting to the Chromecast. Like, it's very possible that the Bluetooth was used just as an initial pairing setup between the Chromecast device and the Stadia controller, and then the Stadia controller connects to the Wi-Fi and sends 99.9% of all of its signals directly through the Wi-Fi. And it would be interesting to tear down the Stadia controller and see what kind of chipset is in it, because if it has something like a ESP8266, that would be a fairly old chip, and I don't know if you can just drop in an ESP32 into the same socket as a 8266 if you were doing something like that. If it's some kind of custom chip, then the part shortage almost certainly would have killed or significantly increased the prices of a Stadia controller beyond what it's worth. If it's not an ESP chip, it could be any number of other companies' chips. But there isn't that many chips out there that would support both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connected, so you'd have to have both a Bluetooth chip and a Wi-Fi chip at that point. So yeah, I'm still anxiously waiting to see if maybe Stadia controllers would go cheap somewhere, but by the time the Stadia controllers do go cheap, there would just have to be very little interest in them, or there would have to be just a ton of them. Yeah, there definitely could be a ton of them out there that would justify them being really at clearance sale prices. But yeah, unfortunately, I will say, as I'm going quiet here and actually overly focusing on playing the game, there is probably going to be a little too much talk about the Stadia now that it's dead compared to even when it was alive, because we definitely didn't see a lot of news articles around Stadia. Why in the world would you play that card? Alright, you want to play that way? We can screw you over on that. You can't equip something that's face down. Here's a news story, and this is shocking. Honestly, I wish I would see more news stories that were actually surprising and shocking, because I guess because I scroll through my Twitter feed, I see most of those stories before I talk about those stories, whereas maybe an initial reaction might be a way of saving time at the very least. Apparently, a No More Heroes 4 could happen with a big fan outcry, says Suda51. Suda would also like to see a modern collection of all three games. I would like to probably see a soft reboot of all three games. Inherently, the concept of No More Heroes works. It is ridiculous fights with a ridiculous hero. You can always write another 10 ridiculous enemies from what is that anime series I'm trying to reference here? Yeah, No More Heroes is just slightly below the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure manga as it is. So you can always write 10 more JoJo's Bizarre Adventure type characters and have 10 more fights in that aspect, in that way. One of the problems, though, definitely, even in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it's worth mentioning, though, is that there was definitely a point where JoJo's Bizarre Adventure's original storyline was so crazy, and I know this because I saw a YouTube video talking about it, and it just got so insanely crazy that they soft rebooted the entire universe because the power creep got too crazy with the enemies. They just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And so you could run into that problem with No More Heroes, but you've got a lot more time in No More Heroes to think about that and make some counterbalances to that. And certainly you could throw out any of the previous history of No More Heroes, because I don't really think that there's that much of a narrative that matters to it. So you could say No More Heroes was just a dream. You could say all 3 of the previous games were just dreams and start over and soft reboot. All you want. I don't even know if it really is news. Like, it may be as much news as that Adam Sessler was fired when I hope I mentioned that like a week or 2 ago when that happened. But Giant Bomb has once again, in the course of less than what feels like a year, been sold to another website. So they have yet another new parent companies, which might very well explain why they did a video with the Nextlander people, which I think I mentioned that, maybe I slipped my mind. It's really not relevant, but like the Nextlander people all basically left Giant Bomb 6 months ago, and then they never mentioned them ever again. And then Jeff Gersman left Giant Bomb like 4 or 5 months ago, and then just this month the Nextlander people come back, so that everything feels very circular. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Gersman comes back too, at some level. But yeah, for the audience looking in, it's a very weird revolving door of people and personalities that you may still have some love for, coming and going, as far as whatever you think Giant Bomb is or could be. So yeah, that's weirdness, and we will see what happens to Giant Bomb once again. At the end of the day, it's still a case where Giant Bomb is just not relevant, and I talk about them way too much. But it is indicative. If anything, we're doing a sampling of one to talk about what the mainstream video game journalism state is, and it is definitely not good. There is very, very little, fewer and fewer people keeping their jobs, in the mainstream video game journalism world, and fewer and fewer people that actually deserve to keep their jobs. 2, that at a certain level, I think nostalgia pushes me to want to see people like Adam Sessler stay in the industry because they have some credibility in my mind as actual video game journalists, whereas I cannot extend the same credits to a lot of the other newer video game journalists who haven't really proved themselves. I can't give them, in my mind, enough time to prove themselves. And frankly, you don't have to give them enough time to prove themselves because they disprove themselves fairly quickly a lot of times. By just doing something stupid or melting down and causing controversy. And inherently, as somebody who is kind of a video game journalist, even though I don't really do any research and I'm just reporting on other people's news, which is what half of all video game journalists actually do. That's an interesting animation. I'm kind of in that same vein. It doesn't help me, though, to see Giant Bomb fail. If anything, I'd want Giant Bomb to succeed. I'd want G4 to succeed. I'd like to see some big numbers. Like, if the New York Post failed and shut down, that doesn't make the local newspaper in a tiny little town really succeed and get more sales. It hurts the whole industry in general. I rely on the mainstream video game journalists to do the heavy lifting and research and find news articles and collect the press releases. Like, I don't have an email address where people could send press releases to me. If I got big enough, then I would definitely have to think about doing that, but until that point, all the news I'm getting is coming directly from Video Games Chronicles, Gamatsu, or GameDeveloper.com, and they're getting half of their news from other people. Now, when you put Giant Bomb in that mix, Giant Bomb themselves is probably not contributing much. Jeff Grubb is trying to do some breaking news, but he's frankly untrustworthy, straight up, and he's not really breaking news consistently. And in a funny way, particularly in Giant Bomb's case, Jeff Grubb feels like the only person that's trying to do any kind of breaking video game news. None of the other employees really have that mandate. We have a Neos RKH on the chat saying hi there, so I'll say hi there back to that. And I should move on with the news myself. Key Disco Elysium developers have reportedly, quote, involuntarily exited the sequel. The lead writer on the original has left and won't contribute further to the sequel. A writer leaving a sequel may just mean that they are done with the writing, but that, or that the development company and producer says they're done with the writing. You don't see a lot of people admitting to being fired effectively. At a certain level, also, I guess I just don't kind of care about Disco Elysium enough to have a major interest in people getting fired. There is definitely a disconnect between the number of people that get talked about that leave a company because they're fired or because they quit, and the actual number of people that get fired and quit. And it gets talked about way more around the video game industry than any other industry, for certain. But yeah, I cannot believe this person is actually winning with basically attacking with the Blast Sphere and only the Blast Sphere this whole time. I mean, seriously, how awful is this deck that it couldn't get past a single character? Or how awfully am I playing this deck? Yeah, and maybe it's just familiarity, but yeah, it definitely feels like Zodiac is doing more. Zodiac actually uses as an extra deck. Zodiac tries to banish cards from the graveyard to the banished pile, and has a trap that brings them back from the banished pile back into the graveyard. Where Flowander really comes off as just banishing cards completely and then bringing them back from being banished, which might be less complicated certainly, but doesn't do as much. It might be a little bit easier to activate effects of these cards when they're banished and return them back to your hand, but that doesn't feel like it's working to actually benefit you. Maybe there's a slight imbalance. Yeah, there might be a slight imbalance in the number of cards. Part of the problem, I think, with Flowander, though, is you also have these cards that force you into playing fairly low attack monsters. Alright, let's move on. Activision's controversial CCO was stepped down ahead of the Microsoft acquisition. This was a former advice to the Bush administration, and so basically this is a rich oligarch who was given a seat at the board in the C-suite of job positions and probably did very little. She more than likely is just friendly with Bobby Kotick or somebody else rich that owns enough shares in Activision Blizzard to get her a job. Notably, I believe she is controversial for writing the Bush administration memo that said torture is okay. But specifically, she's getting fired. She's under fire, not getting actually fired, because she kind of was supposed to be the one in charge of making sure they didn't get sued by the Department of Economic and Fair Housing, or whatever DEHF is. So the poop is for once in its life, or rolling uphill. Occasionally somebody has to be sacrificed, and at a certain level it almost screams that Bobby Kotick is throwing her under the bus, and she probably doesn't care, to protect himself, when clearly people want Bobby Kotick out. And at a certain level, you get rid of Bobby Kotick's friend, and then there's one less person supporting Bobby Kotick staying as the boss or in charge. So maybe they're just chipping at his support group, his yes men, or in this case, yes woman. Yeah, there's not really a lot to say here. The funniest part about this, though, is while Townsend is stepping down, she will still act as a senior advisor to the company's board and chief executive Bobby Kotick. So she's still involved, and she's still probably sucking money out of the company. It is going to be a nightmare for Microsoft to clean up Activision Blizzard. So much so that if I was Microsoft and I actually did acquire Activision Blizzard, you really do just have to fire all the management in Activision Blizzard. In fact, you kind of have a nice setup in which you can fire all the management and clean house at Activision Blizzard, and then you can say, well, that was a special case. We're not going to do that at Bethesda, and we're not doing that at Double Fine, and we're not doing that at 343 or any of the other companies. But then you can set the precedent to say, well, actually, a year from the point that you would potentially acquire Activision Blizzard and clean house there, you could say, actually, we saw a lot of things improve when we got rid of all the management, and we learned a lot from what we did with Activision Blizzard, so let's get rid of all the Bethesda management level employees too, that they're redundant and unnecessary. And that wouldn't really be a terrible thought either. Like, clearly there is a lot of glut in management in almost every industry, but particularly in video games. Like, when you see video games that are developed by one person and they look just as good and are just as well received as video games that are developed by 300-400 people, with there just being 4 or 5 different levels of management, obviously the 4 or 5 different levels of management are not necessary in a lot of scenarios. You particularly see that in the case of like Square Enix, where there's just a major management problem there that is constantly allowing bad games to be made and then blaming the fact that those games are bad on different companies, different developers, when the connecting repeated variable is obviously that they're the publisher, and either they're not doing enough oversight as far during the development phase, or they're not doing enough advertising and promotion in the selling phase of games. Moving on, PlayStation Stars might have a hidden invite-only diamond tier, which reference to a 5th tier was seemingly found in the PlayStation app. Which, honestly, if you were programming an app, it wouldn't be crazy to have an extra tier just for debugging purposes or for video game journalists. PlayStation Stars is a 5th tier may be introduced later, or it may be on the table that they might introduce this. Being level 4 apparently can skip the queue when contacting customer support, so that already was a dumb idea as a loyalty program. And so now we have a second controversy in as many weeks around this loyalty app that should have been put out as an announcement and then immediately forgotten about by most people, particularly journalists. There really is no reason to mention, to have any articles around it until it comes out and people can talk about it and see see how it goes. This is very confusing to pretty much everyone involved. A Horizon Zero Dawn remaster is in the works for the PlayStation 5, it's been claimed. Source claims that an update to the 2017 game, so 5-year-old game, is in development alongside with a multiplayer spin-off. I'm fairly certain that Horizon Zero Dawn plays backward compatible just fine from its PlayStation 4 version. So, unless they are going to take the more bloated fat face textures and lighting and put it on the original game just to make her more bloated and fat, then there's nothing really that's going to change. Like, the graphics will look maybe 5%, 10% better. Maybe it would be a very easy port, almost certainly. So maybe it's an experiment where they had no other projects to really work on. So they said, hey, let's put some deep learning super sampling in it and show off some ray tracing or something that has come out since, as far as the last 5 years, as far as video graphics capabilities. But at a certain point, it does just seem like Sony is trying to suck as much money out of its big name titles as it is losing more and more big name titles. It could also be that it is just really easy to parallel develop a new PlayStation 5 version of the game while developing maybe a PC port, assuming that there isn't already a PC port of Horizon Zero Dawn, which I don't know if there is or not, come to think of it. I think there's a PC version of the second game, so I would assume that there was a PC version of the first game, but I could be wrong about that also. There might be a general desire to get rid of PlayStation 4 discs on shelves completely, but why not just slap a sticker on a PlayStation 4 disc at that point and say, put the sticker over the PlayStation 4 logo and put a sticker that says compatible with the PlayStation 4 and 5, and then just have PlayStation 5 really big. If they wanted to perhaps change the shape or format of the actual plastic CD DVD cases, that they really couldn't do that and shouldn't do that until they release like a PlayStation 6, and at that point, yeah, there's a thought of redoing the shape and size of the discs. But there is also certainly a thought about leaving it all the same size so it looks good on the shelf and just having a different color palette. But nothing about shelving really would explain it. Would it make sense or be logical to explain making a remaster? Let's move on. The PlayStation 5 has also reportedly been jailbroken. A limited but seemingly legitimate exploit has been discovered, is the subtitle here. I heard it has something to do with the web browser and just I assume, access error, memory access error going through the web browser. And part of the demo shows them putting PT on a PlayStation 5, where PT would have never been on a PlayStation 5, because PT would have been removed from the store before the PlayStation 5 came out. Yep. They mentioned this. A PS4 package file, i.e. backup of the game, being installed. So apparently the exploit only works 30% of the time, usually requiring multiple attempts to execute, and it has to have 4.03 firmware. So really, until they stop updating the firmware, which could be basically never, there's always a chance that the firmware will be upgraded. And these memory exploits, I think in particular, are going to start to not be a thing in the next 20 or 30 years if we move to a language like Rust to make at least the operating systems and web browsers, because Rust is specifically designed as a programming language to avoid allowing those kinds of memory leaks to happen. And Rust is fairly new at the moment as a programming language. It's only 5 years old, which is, relatively speaking, a baby as far as a programming language. And there's a very high possibility that people don't adopt Rust or any new programming language, and 10-20 years down the line we're still programming on some level of C++ and C# for most apps. But if there is a real movement to move to Rust, then we will start to see fewer and fewer bugs. Of course, code will get bigger and bigger, and there will just be more apps and more code around there, so there will always be room for there to be a bug to happen. And at a certain hardware level, there is a possibility of adding enough hardware into CPUs where memory leaks don't work. But I don't think we're quite to the point where any kind of hardware would solve all of those problems. Meanwhile, I still have personally on the back burner a PlayStation 3 that I've barely ever used and was only holding on to for a Blu-ray player, and at this point I would like a newer Blu-ray player and a newer surround sound system, even though I'd never use either one, which is why I don't actually buy them. So it would make some sense for me if I found some extra time to hack a PlayStation 3 on my PlayStation 3 and put a bunch of like ROMs on it and play older games on it instead of the few PlayStation 3 games I might want to play on it, which actually I don't have time to do any of that, so that's why I haven't done it. And I don't see any reason at this point why anybody would want to get a PlayStation 4. If you don't have a PlayStation 4, just jump to a PlayStation 5. There is hope on the horizon. I don't think there's a single console that's never been jailbroken. Maybe there's been some consoles that were just not that popular, so people weren't really trying, or they were jailbroken years after the consoles were dead. Like I bet the Wii U probably doesn't benefit much from being jailbroken. But yeah, the next step that would be very interesting around the PlayStation 5 being jailbroken is how does a PlayStation 5 handle installing something like Windows and trying to have an operating system on it? Or would you have to go to Linux or Chrome, a Chromebook type setup? It is a little crazy, and this is something that I think the next generation of consoles really need to address, is that now that we see the Steam Deck by default having a desktop mode, and cell phones by default pretty much having a desktop mode, although I don't think iPhones actually do have a desktop mode, come to think of it. But now that we see that as a thing that is normalized, at least in a lot of places, well, it is insane to have the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, both of which are very powerful computers and aren't really doing anything special otherwise as far as being computers. It's crazy that they don't have a desktop mode. It's really crazy that the Xbox made by Microsoft doesn't have a Windows mode. And it doesn't have to really do that much. It can be a very poor experience on Windows in which it is a walled garden where you just get Microsoft Office and Word and Excel and things like that. And then it's just a little desktop mode that is a sales pitch where you can like browse websites and you can do your homework on it. But that would be a great sales point for a lot of parents to say, well, it's also a computer, but it's a locked-down computer. So they can't install viruses on it. They can't run into Windows Update bugs that are as big of a problem. Like, at a certain level, you could see an alternate history where Microsoft pushes Windows to be only available on Xbox Series X consoles and get rid of the support that they have to do as far as all the other OEM manufacturers of other computers. That really wouldn't fly, but yeah, I could see them trying to have a special version of Windows that they sell as better that only works on that one device. Windows 11 already requires a trusted platform module enough to the point where it is significantly reducing the number of people, number of hardware setups that can install Windows 11. Yeah, it's a lot there. And if I had a kid right now that wanted a console, I definitely would have to think that we are close enough to do the experiments now where getting a Steam Deck and getting a dock and having a Steam Deck be their computer and their video game console with my family shared Steam library makes sense. Or at least makes enough sense. Moving on, back to video game news. PlayStation VR 2 mass production is reportedly started with 2 million units planned for the launch, which that's a lot of units for a VR headset. Like, because roughly, I think a video game in particular is successful if it gets between 300,000 to a million units sold, and there are some bigger games that have been out for many years that have sold 5 million, 10 million. Like Resident Evil 4, for instance, probably is in the 10 to 20 million range as one thing. And that is, I guess, maybe some comparison if they were expecting that Resident Evil Village on the PlayStation VR 2, which I think it's coming to the PlayStation VR 2, I don't know. If every single person bought a PSVR 2 that bought Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil Village, then maybe those numbers make sense, but otherwise it really doesn't make sense at all. Unless they just have a major lineup of games that people haven't announced. Notably here, they're pointing out that it took 8 months for the first PlayStation VR to reach 1 million sales. So their initial production run for the launch of 2 million is incredibly ambitious. This very possibly could be the thing that kills Jim Ryan as being the person in charge at Sony, putting all the eggs in one basket with the PlayStation VR, and then it failing miserably. It could fail potentially as bad as like the Virtual Boy failed. And at a certain point that might be interesting. If all of a sudden I'm getting a PlayStation VR 2 headset, not because I'm ever going to plug it into a PlayStation, but just because I'm going to take it apart and try and hack it to work on a computer. But it would, I definitely need to see what kind of equipment is in a PlayStation VR headset before there would be any chance of even thinking that's possible. I actually saw a new gadget that's a little too expensive. It's an augmented reality glasses for about $300. It doesn't have a battery in it. It's charged directly off of your phone, and it just has a little USB connection on the back of it that then plugs into the USB-C on your phone, and then you can either use the app or you can just mirror share your image on a cell phone to get the equivalent of a fairly bright 109-inch screen about 9 feet away from your face. Plus, it's augmented reality glasses, so you can see through it, but then it comes with a blackout shade that you clip on the top of these sunglasses, and that kind of just look like black plastic glasses, cheap sunglasses basically. It doesn't look crazy. It doesn't have a camera or a Google Glass. It does have speakers, but no microphone. But yeah, if we start to see devices like that come down in price a little bit, then you have the idea of potentially plugging the glasses directly into the Steam Deck and seeing the screen from the Steam Deck and right in front of your eyes instead of having to look down and look at the controller screen. Plus, you can turn off the screen on the Steam Deck when you're doing that, and it actually saves you battery on the Steam Deck. And that gives you, again, a monitor that could be part of a setup to go into that desktop mode while on the go. You would still want like a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard in front of you, but having a Steam Deck sit on a table next to you, having a wire connected to it, having sunglasses on you, it definitely gets very cyberpunkish. Well, cyberdeck-ish, I suppose would be the better phrase to use. Well, that didn't work. Moving on, Halo's developer is reportedly switching to the Unreal Engine. Halo Infinite has suffered from numerous delays and cuts, which are potentially partially due to its tech. Yeah. At a certain level, this is very believable, but also it's a very easy rumor to just make out whole cloth. But for the past couple decades, there's been a lot of push for companies to use their internal proprietary engines to save money on licensing fees on the engines, when everybody really should have just been more open sourced in the first place. And they're still not really going open sourced as far as an engine goes. They're just moving to the Unreal Engine, which is more of an industry standard. There is definitely an alternate history timeline, though, where there would have just been an open source game engine that everybody jumped aboard on 20-30 years ago, and it would just be really, really good at this point. Particularly if you take code from the Slipspace engine that is somewhat decent, open source that, or just open source all the code and let people see the code so people can improve upon it. When you think about what Halo is, it's running and gunning and jumping, and it has its Warthog vehicle control and some other vehicle control, but that's pretty much all it does. Like anytime you try to get anywhere away from the way Halo plays, you would have to write totally new code. It would be a new problem that you'd have to start over from scratch on. And it kind of sucks that we're moving towards everybody using Unreal Engine, but it's not terrible either, because that leads to a lot of highly optimized code, I imagine, where if we saw future consoles be highly optimized around running Unreal Engine programs, we would see probably better performance. Actually, today's news might be a little short, come to think of it, because it's, I think, Japanese Golden Week or Asian Golden Week at this, so it looks like I only really have 3 Gamatsu articles today, this Monday, so far. Nintendo has officially launched a new animation studio called Nintendo Pictures. It aims to create unique videos that will remain in the memories forever. That is a general description. I imagine this is either to make Nintendo short videos to put on TV or in movie theaters, or it is a CG company that is going to just have better trailers and cutscenes for the beginning and endings of Nintendo games. When you really think about it, Nintendo really hasn't done a lot of full CG intros or fully animated intros compared to a lot of the Japanese RPG games, where you'll see a trailer that shows you this highly animated flat 2D intro, and then that flat 2D intro that looks really good goes away and you see the actual game and it's just these tiny little chibi polygon 3D models. And I definitely don't like that bait and switch type animations, but there is a middle ground where you can have nice animated intros and actually nice visuals in the game, and I would hope Nintendo goes that route. But yeah, we really won't know what they do or what they're even really focused on doing until we see their first couple of products. In a lot of ways, it may just be the case that Nintendo acquired an animation company, because they did, and they are now just kind of rebranding it and making it look better. It would be very weird to all of a sudden have Nintendo doing anime shows that have nothing to do with Nintendo properties. If all of a sudden you see the latest anime on Japanese TV and it just says animated by Nintendo, that would be very weird, particularly if it's like a late night anime that's full of adult content, cussing and nudity or something like that, and then that's being claimed by that's been animated by Nintendo. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles, we're still doing Video Games Chronicle articles, says the tattoo artist has successfully sued 2K for replicating their designs on a WWE 2K wrestler. They argued that 2K didn't have permission to include Randy Orton's tattoos in the game. I'm not sure which way this lawsuit really should have gone, because the thing here is a tattoo artist more than likely should give up any rights to reproduction of their tattoos when somebody is a celebrity and they have their tattoos. Well, it's not even when somebody's a celebrity, when anybody's likeness is reproduced. Inherently, this judgment, unless it is argued on some other grounds that I'm not gonna ever be aware of, the slippery slope argument here, and at this point I believe every slippery slope does slip to the bottom, is that a tattoo artist could give somebody a tattoo when they're drunk and 19 years old, and then that person could be 50 years old later and take a picture of, have a picture taken of themselves, and then that tattoo artist could sue the photographer for taking the picture of that person because they're using their art without permission. I think you effectively give up any claims to your art when you put it on the skin of another. Like that seems reasonable. Once somebody's likeness is changed, people should own their own likenesses. As far as tattoos, it's different when if somebody took a picture and in that picture there was, say, they were holding a picture of the Mona Lisa. Okay, maybe at that point you can see that's ridiculous. A human choosing to hold the Mona Lisa in front of them doesn't allow you to copy the Mona Lisa. Although the Mona Lisa is a bad example because it's already in public domain. But yeah, I think once you tattoo something on somebody's skin, it's probably a public domain tattoo. And suing people for anything like that is ridiculous. This lawsuit should not have gone that way, in my opinion. Pretty much tattoo artists all around the world know you get your $50, you get your $200, whatever, to put the tattoo on the skin, and that's all you're ever going to get from it. So, and almost certainly, I would think every other tattoo artist in the world would have never sued for this because it's just completely ridiculous. It sucks, certainly, to be on the side of 2K because nobody likes 2K. But this really feels like this needs to go to an appeal. At a certain level, you're not 3D scanning a body is not really an artistic creation. So I'd also see and argued I would argue when you're 3D scanning a human body, even if the human body does have tattoos and art on them, at that point that 3D scan probably shouldn't be copyrightable either. So this isn't a case where I think 2K deserves the rights to their 3D scan or derivative work of the tattoo. I think the tattoo at that point, I think tattoos in particular really should just be considered public domain. So the U.S. District Court of the Southern District of Illinois saying that the use doesn't constitute fair use. I don't know why it doesn't constitute fair use. This really is a blow to fair use and a wrong direction for copyright and people who have to work with copyright creators in a lot of ways. She won $3,750 in damage. She was offered originally $450 for the likeness, but it definitely sets a bad precedence. It's also worth mentioning that in 2020 there was a precedent already sold in which a tattoo company called Solid Oak Sketches argued that it owned the copyright to do the tattoo designs on the NBA star LeBron James, Keon Martin, and Eric Bledsoe, which had been recreated in the game without permission. In that instance, it was unsuccessful. So almost certainly you have two cases that are very similar that now would be thrown up to higher courts to consider on appeal. And since this court case happened less, I am currently dueling outside of a telling period. Why would I be outside of a telling period now? No, it says it's currently open, so yeah, that's a bad judgment, and if anything it just kind of highlights the problem with the US court system that hopefully will eventually get fixed through appeals processes, but there is a lot of room for bad judgments, as it were, in the US court system, and almost every court system. I don't know of a better system, really. I mean, at a certain point, maybe the court system really should just be run by an AI, and just throw your hat in the crazy randomization answers, like or just flip a coin to see who wins. That would speed up the process and leave everything up to chance. I doubt many people would support flipping a coin, but maybe you could make an artificial intelligence that was just the judge of all cases. Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Bethesda has detailed its plans for a Fallout's 25th anniversary this month. It includes a free Fallout 76 trial, which nobody cares about, Fallout Shelter content, which I don't think that many people are still playing, and a franchise sale to sell more copies of all their other games. So, not really a lot there for a 25th anniversary. It is somewhat backwards that consumers expect there to be giveaways, frankly, on an anniversary, but at a certain level, it also makes sense. Like, the only reason why people are still talking about Fallout 25 years later is because of the fans, and they probably do deserve some reward, and treating your customers nice is a great way to build more fandom. Noticeably, you could very easily say we're giving away Fallout 1 and 2 for their 25th anniversary. Just give away those games for free. They don't really have any value to future sales anyways. You could give away a ton of DLC. All DLC on Fallout 3 could be given away for free, and not that many people would care about that. You could mention Fallout New Vegas, which is the one game people actually really do still love. You could promise some exciting new content, teasers, trailers being shown for the Fallout series. Yep, there's definitely other things you could do. There's a Fallout TV series. They could put a teaser trailer around that also. Let's see, the first Dead Space remake gameplay trailer is coming on Tuesday, which honestly is fairly far away from the gameplay trailer that was shown for the Callisto Protocol, which was last week, I think, that we got that gameplay trailer. Again, it though isn't that far away that you can't throw the accusation that EA is rushing now in this week to make a gameplay trailer just so people forget about the Callisto Protocol trailer that came out last week. EA is acting incredibly spitefully, it feels like, with this Dead Space remake when they really don't have anything to show, and maybe the new trailer will show us something new, but I wouldn't be surprised if the new trailer is very lackluster and then they just get feedback from the community saying, well, we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this, and then they crowdsource more changes, which they've already done that once. But yeah, there really is no rush and no need for Dead Space to come out anytime near the Callisto Protocol. Just let the Callisto Protocol come out. Give it its 6 weeks window, launch window, and then release Dead Space 3 if you're going to release it at all. Moving on, Horizon Forbidden West actor appears to have teased the DLC plans in a since deleted tweet, which, okay. Yeah, I would assume that there would have been some DLC plans there. Is this the face actor for Alloy? I wonder. Yeah, I wonder if it really is just a situation where the face actor for Alloy in the COVID lockdown, just her face structure changed and they couldn't figure out a way to map the points that they were getting onto the 3D model of the original game, and that's why her face was more bloated. That's probably a problem that's happening right now, is that a lot of face actors that were getting face scanned for previous parts in the lockdown gained a lot of weight, not exercising, not going to auditions, not working as much, and just being in general depressed. And that will be like a continued problem, I imagine, in general, in which you are going to have this need to map what is fairly average amounts of fat off the face of people to get down to what people expect to see in movies, which is anorexic people, and in video games, which is anorexic, often unrealistic depictions of people. But that's the point of video games in the first place, and if they can't map a fat face to a skinny face, or a skinny face to a fat face in the face mapping technology, then they need to go back to the old technology, which takes more time, and just hand animate everything and hand wireframe everything. There's a danger here that we're going to have a generation of people that only know how to work with face scans and don't know how to do hand wireframed, hand animated characters. And that can be a problem, certainly. I saw another review of Saints Row, although there's really no reason to look at any review of the Saints Row reboot, but it specifically did show like all of the pre-built characters that you can play as, and show that most of them look pretty awful visually for pre-built characters. Let's see, moving on, the new Need for Speed game looks set to be revealed this week, which, okay. At a certain level, I guess that's nice to just not have a lot of teasing before an actual announcement. Reportedly, Need for Speed Unbound will be released in December. Let's see. A new version of The Outer Wilds has been rated for the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC. This is the Spacer's Choice Edition, and it's been classified in Taiwan, which, okay, good to know. I think we should probably stop playing at this point. We made more progress than I thought I would. The clock counts down here, but they've done something where I'm not noticing that the clock is counting down as much. You know what, while we're doing this, let's just go ahead and activate this and cancel its abilities and just activate this. That way, if we have daily quests, we know that we can work with that. And see, like the Gamatsu articles here, we only have 3 Gamatsu articles at all. World Rallying Championships Generations has been delayed to November 3rd. Grand Blue Fantasy Festival 2022-23 has been set for January 20th to the 22nd. And these are fairly small articles, certainly too. And then here is the story that I mentioned at the very beginning. Chaos Head Noah for PC is no longer coming to Steam. Spike Chunsoft is looking for alternative storefronts. Interestingly, they don't even know of an alternative storefront. Steam's cancellation is due to guideline required changes of the game's content. And so here you have anime characters, guy and girl, in a school uniform of some sort with weapons. And yeah, it's not really going for the moe art style in which you have shorter limbs. It's kind of stretched out and elongated as far as this screenshot. I saw a different screenshot, but basically the same art style. So yeah, censorship does exist. It's nice to be able to come out from the cold every now and then and say, yes, Steam actually is censoring some games and forcing some changes on some games. And personally, I still believe that the scrutiny is unfairly being placed on the anime art style and the school uniforms of Japanese characters versus school uniforms or just the depiction of kids in general in Western games. Although, in all fairness, I can't really name a Western game that depicts students or young kids that much either. That the biggest difference, though, is when a character like Alloy is said to be over 18, nobody questions it. When a character like Alloy very easily could be seen as being younger than 18. Not that there's anything in Horizon Zero Dawn games, but it is not believed when this animation style says a character is over 18, which is unfair because these are fake characters not derived off of anybody. So it's just as fair to say this person is one as it is fair to say they're 1,000 years old, as it's fair to say they're 19 years old. Like, they're fake characters. Whatever the creators say their age is what their age is. Or you go with the other argument to say that they are as old as their first drawing, which would make them all very much underage for whatever that really would mean. But yeah, this is not a human being, and Steam and people in the West, SJWs a lot of times, and others, don't seem to ever get the difference between reality and fiction. Like, this is not a human being. You don't have giant eyeballs. You don't have giant pupils. You don't have a tiny little arc of 2 lines that makes a nose. It just doesn't exist. You don't have magical weapons. You're not in a magical world. And it's all just fantasy. And fantasy should be allowed. And thought should be allowed. And thought policing people is just not acceptable in almost every scenario, or if not every scenario. I could see, no, I think pretty much every scenario. There's a difference between like somebody, an individual being crazy or mentally challenged and not having them exposed to complex thoughts, or somebody being depressed and knowing that they don't want to expose themselves to scary movies or depressing thoughts. Now I'm just going through the games that came out on Steam. But that's more of an individual thing. That's not all of society shouldn't be allowed to have scary movies, or all of society shouldn't be able to tell depressing stories. Yeah, this might be an interesting Zelda game, but it doesn't have a release date, so I'm not gonna can't put it on the follow list. I want to burn through these fairly quickly, just because Gematsu didn't have a lot of articles doesn't mean that there won't be a decent amount of games that came out over this weekend on Steam. Of course, not really expecting much of them to be good, so we can burn through this fairly quickly. I still would like this to be a better experience, where this must be an internet meme, this Tamore. Some kind of creepypasta. Kind of a visual novel photography game. Yeah, I'll give it a follow. Yeah, I want to go through every game that comes out, now more than ever, because YouTube Shorts, for the amount of effort I put into them, are getting me a lot of views, and probably a decent watch percentage on views. Not that watch percentage is really something that the YouTube algorithm seems to care about. Like, because a YouTube short that's 1 minute, where everybody watches 1 minute of the content, would, if you were comparing watch percentages, that would be great. Particularly since YouTube shorts loop around, so most people probably see more than 100% of the content. But yeah, for the amount of work it does to make a YouTube shorts, I'm getting a decent amount of views. It's not leading to insane amounts of subscriptions, which I wish it would, but it's better than, say, Detention, which is airing on my channel right now, and I don't know if a single one of the episodes of Detention has even gotten a single view, and I put a lot more time and effort into playing that game. Although in all fairness, that's also me playing a game I wanted to play versus a YouTube short, which is me not interacting with it at all. And it certainly would suck if the way my YouTube channel actually succeeds at some point is by me eliminating all of my creative input and eliminating all of my criticism. This Gigabuster looks interesting enough for a YouTube short, but the actual process of going through these games, I wish there was a way to smooth it out a little bit more. I could certainly, if I could figure out a way to run the macro so that it would open just like one new game and then one article, then one new game, then one new article, and just jumped around more, that might make it a smoother experience. But that would probably not be better for the audience. This looks like this is a VR game. It's not out. It doesn't have a release date yet though, so I'm gonna not do anything with it. And we still have the adult content trigger flipped, so at some point over this weekend you'd expect there to be at least one adult game, but maybe not. It does seem like there aren't that many. I could also see with the Chaos Head Noah controversy, as much as it should be a controversy and as little as it actually will be a controversy, I could see them just holding back and not releasing any adult games for a few days. Here we have a point-click adventure game that's probably nothing, so I'm not going to bother to give it a YouTube short, but we have a game that's called Marauders that's mixed. Well, if people are actually playing it and already hating it as an online PvP game, then I'm just going to say no to it. This looks like a Metroidvania game and a precision platformer that's not quite visually enough polished to interest me. I don't want to end up having tons and tons of Metroidvania games on my wish list or YouTube shorting them, so I'm going to say no to that one. And maybe that's too much of a personal opinion there. Alright, so here we have an adult game. What's interesting in this one, Lustcraft, is that it is a 3D model of a woman, but her hair and her eyes feel a little bit more anime-esque, and maybe that's just because she has dark eyes and dark hair. Her breasts are arguably, compared to her head, quite large, and interestingly, all the screenshots are just showing detached player hands groping her breasts, and that seems to be all there is to it. It's just like a breast massage groping simulator with a single color background. And let's see, it doesn't seem like it's VR, which, well, that might make a little bit more sense. So in a weird way, it's just kind of not a game. It doesn't actually have a release date or anything either. But it is allowed on Steam. The screenshots allow for full presenting groped breasts on every single one of the screenshots. Clearly this is just like a low effort asset flip of a 3D model. But how that would actually play if you were going to try to turn that into a game is questionable, because, I mean, best case scenario, you are rotating the right stick and the left stick to control both of the hands independently, and then right trigger, left trigger to squeeze. And so this may be, in a funny way, like the best breast physics simulator I've ever seen on Steam, but it's really nothing more than that. Inherently, though, it's not doing a lot. Like, it doesn't seem like you really have an ability to like tweak the nipple with the thumb. There's no licking, sucking, no really twisting, pinching, pulling. There's no toys involved here, so you're not getting like nipple clamps or needles if you're getting really extreme, to clothespins. There's no rope for like shibari bondage or anything like that. Like, if you really were going to take it to that direction, and at a certain point, why just focus on the breast? There's a way more ambitious adult game concept around that if it is just going to be, here's a 3D model that kind of reacts to whatever you do as far as a groping minigame. But these kinds of groping minigames have existed and have been censored out of games that were then allowed on Steam once they were censored out. So why is this no-name company allowed to asset flip a groping minigame and allow it on Steam? The only answer I can come up with is that this is a 3D model that looks more like a Western game, so they said yes, and any flat 2D model gets told no. Anything that looks like an Eastern animation style gets told no. And that's not fair. That's, for lack of a better term, xenophobic. Moving on, we have a 2D platformer called Fall in the Last Light. It looks a little dark screenshot syndrome, but I'll give it a follow. Although it doesn't really have a release date, so I'll take it off the follow list for that reason. Let's see. Here, this one also is labeled as having sexual content. Orgy-nizer. Is it a pixel-y game where you organize an orgy? I believe that is exactly what it is. Organize a swinger party and match people. And so it's a little pixel-y images, so all of this is YouTube family friendly. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that there's a difference between a swinger party and an orgy. Orgies, I think, require a guarantee of 3 or more couples or something like that. The numbers are bigger when it's an orgy compared to a swingers party. Also, I think orgies in general give an implication that everybody that's allowed in the door is willing and able to willing and ready to have sex with anybody else in the orgy, even guys on guys and girls on girls. Whereas swingers parties more tend to be, you get together, you have snacks, you have a meet and greet, and then you decide to invite somebody into your threesome or four-way. I think it's not an orgy until you get to like a 5-way. And see, this is funny because this game in particular is not actually in the adult content, even though it's tagged with sexual content, and it's being compared to Honey Pop, which visually Honey Pop looks way better as a game. And I just expect at some point we will have a potential game like Honey Pop try to come out and it be completely rejected by Steam, even as a sequel to Honey Pop 1 and 2, from the same creator. Here we have another surreal claymation game that doesn't have a release date. This I don't think looks like anything of interest. Yeah, at this point I also have decided that I probably just want to buy a new mouse. I just think I've broken my mouse enough that it makes sense to buy a new one. I'm gonna wait till the Prime Day sale. I'm not really expecting to buy too much on the Prime Day sale, but that's what I said in the last Prime Day sale, so who knows. But having 2 Prime Day sale type things or Amazon sales in a year is not realistic. Coin flipper idle game, pretty dumb concept. Yeah, there might be something to this. It's kind of like a RPG game. It says it has single player. Little Stardew Valley RPG, monster creator, farming thing. But yeah, I really am not expecting to buy too much on the sale. I'm not expecting really that much to be on sale. Amazon announced a whole bunch of new home automation type stuff to lock people into their system, and yeah, I'm not getting into their home automation system. So unless some of the new hardware that Amazon announced puts competitive hardware on sale, I would say nothing really is going to go big. And one of the things that Amazon does fairly often, I'm going to give this a chance, is that they put their old Kindles on sale, but by the time the Kindles are on sale, there are these like refurbished things that have 5-year-old batteries in them. So unless you're willing to potentially take a scratch and dent Kindle and put a new battery in it, you really shouldn't buy those. Plus, you pretty much need to double check if you can jailbreak a Kindle and put your own ebooks on it, or if you're just getting locked into their system anyways. In a lot of ways, I've wanted ebooks to be a successful thing for over 20-15 years at this point, and it's just not a thing. It really is like that meme, stop trying to make it happen, it's just never going to happen. People don't read books anywhere as much as they pretend like they do, and people that do read books now more than ever, I think, want a physical book in their hands. And the people that tend to read books tend to be kids anyway, so handing them an ebook machine doesn't make the most sense. Streamer Future Wars. So yeah, as far as over the weekend, it seems like we have just a couple of ridiculous low-effort adult games. This one is kind of a joke game that has censored, blurred out characters' genitalia, and I wonder if there's a way to uncensor it or not. This is just, though obviously, a joke around the idea of Dark Souls, a Dark Souls game, and just being a derp, which I don't even know if the phrase derp is used that much these days. But yeah, not a ton of good games at all over the weekend. Maybe slightly fewer games in general, or slightly fewer Asian games in general, whether they're adult or not adult games, just because of Golden Week. We could certainly see that happen, where we see fewer JRPGs and fewer visual novels. It does kind of feel like we're seeing fewer and fewer visual novels in general get released. This looks like this is some kind of multiplayer game that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Alright. This doesn't look visually polished enough. And see, at that is literally all the games that came out over the weekend. So we're at the GameDeveloper.com articles. Stadia exclusive Death Stranding successor was turned down by Google, which almost certainly Google turned down a lot of things, so it's not really that big of news. We probably will hear more stories of Google getting pitches and turning them down, and that lets companies potentially rub it into Google and say, well, you would have succeeded had you approved our game pitch. But that's also a bad way to do business in general, because that is going to just create bad relationships with Google, and who knows, in the future game companies may go back to Google. It wouldn't be crazy for Google to make a publishing division or a production development team around video games. Google in particular, having connections to AdSense, could cut out the middleman and be a video game publisher for AAA games on consoles, and then you could start seeing ads on YouTube and Google searches all over the place for those games, and it would be a very profitable push, assuming as long as they have a good game that actually does sell. Apparently EA's Onrush is losing its online features in November. Ubisoft IO Interactive have announced efforts to transfer players' saves off of Stadia, which maybe that's all they're going to do, is just move the save files over and not give keys to people who own, who would have had access to those games. I'm not 100% sure you actually bought the games on Stadia, but I think you did. I think that was part of the problem with Stadia too, is that it was this system where you bought the game and you paid to have it streaming, so you were getting double charged. Or you bought the game, but then you really didn't own the game because now it's being shut down, which that certainly would show where a lack of trust by consumers could come from, is that it doesn't really make sense and you're not getting a physical disc. If you were going to do a streaming service like that, it almost makes sense to mail an actual disc copy of your choice extra. But at a certain level, if Netflix mailed a DVD of every show you wanted while you also had the streaming ability, that would have bankrupted Netflix. And yeah, obviously Netflix succeeded doing the exact opposite of that and getting rid of its DVD shipping business and focusing on streaming only. But there's a difference there between a maybe 12-hour season of a show, if you have like 24 half-hour episodes, and a 60-hour video game that you probably will want to come back to. And it's certainly not a case like Stadia had as many different things you could jump around and play compared to a Netflix library, which just has thousands of shows. Let's see, GameDeveloper.com has the same article. Sony prepping 2 million PSVR 2 units. Activision Blizzard's exec Francis Townsend has left the company. Townsend's departure from Activision Blizzard comes over a year after blaming California's lawsuit for contributing to the damage of the company's culture rather than the allegations of harassment. I guess this is her. And for what I would assume is her age, just looking at the jawline and the amount of freckles on this cutout, I don't think this is quite an appropriate chart. It's a little too weird and wild. And this is like CBS This Morning or something that she's on. And clearly she had a professional like do her hair and her makeup. So that is an odd short choice. But yeah, we already covered that story. And we also already covered that there's a report that the Disco Elysium co-creators have been ousted from the developer. ZA/UM, I guess is the developer. And then the Metroid Exodus animator Andriy Korzinski has died. Um, let's see. Following a career at the Ukrainian animation studio Pixelation, he transitioned to the game industry and contributed to develop for 4A Games Metroid Exodus. Did he die? Do we know how he died? Because in Ukraine right now, it could be he was actually in combat. Yeah. Says he died while performing a combat mission in the struggle for independent sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, writes Stepanov, a talented animator, incredible person, and a real hero. Yep. And if anything, as far as people looking out in, clearly it's a real struggle for protecting your independent sovereignty and territorial integrity. This isn't really a case where there were plenty of soldiers who were career soldiers and ready for combat and prepared to fight in Russia. They are getting pretty much anybody and everybody they can to join their military, and I don't think too many people are getting really drafted on the Ukrainian side, although on the Russian side it seems like a lot of people are being drafted at this point. Because yeah, you wouldn't have an animator in the military if you could avoid it. Also, maybe because he was an animator and not a trained career soldier, that might have been part of the problem as to why he died, but who knows. That's kind of blaming the victim for no good reason and speculating wildly for no good reason. But yeah, the conflict probably will have more stories like this as it goes on. And I don't want to get into a big rant around Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as far as it mostly doesn't connect to video games. It does say here at the bottom that he voluntarily enlisted into the Ukrainian military. It is worth also mentioning, though, if we're talking about militaries struggling to have enough soldiers, the U.S. military missed their recruitment goals by like 16,000 units recently. I just saw that on the news, and there is definitely some speculation as to maybe there's just more jobs available and poverty is just not that big of a deal. So there aren't enough poor people that are so desperate that they would join the military. There is also speculation that some of the massive debt from school loans has made fewer people get desperate enough to join the military. But the recurring theme, certainly around the speculation, is that most people are desperate in one way or another, and that's why they join the U.S. military. There's not a lot of people that feel a matter of like pride alone to join the military, and definitely basically no rich people are joining the military ever. But yeah, and it's not just financial desperation, I would say, too. There's definitely other situations, or just legacy desperation. My grandfather, my father, my great-grandfather all had military careers, so I have this pressure, this desperation to also join. And it would be nice if all militaries around the world struggled to have people to join it. I already suspect we're at a point where a lot of countries around the world are lying about how many people they have in general, and we may be closer to 4 billion than 7 billion as far as the populace, particularly after the pandemic. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of countries say we have a military of 2 billion people when they really only have a military of 1 billion people. Do we need to talk about Nintendo unveiling an official website for Nintendo Pictures? Probably not. Let's see. I mean, it would be informative to go and look. Let's see what this looks like in Japanese. Japanese. It's a highly interactive website, perhaps too interactive for its own good. And it doesn't really seem like it's showing any pictures or anything else like that. It's basically just a recruitment and a single web page, as it were. And on mobile phones, maybe it would look a little bit better, but that's about it. There would be a way for me to try and like translate this page if I wanted to, but I don't really see a reason to bother to translate it. It really is just like a we're hiring website, so not really that informative. Okay, let's do some follow list cleanup, and then that's going to be it for today. We have this game Vinge that is rated very positively, which is some kind of survival horror game that kind of looks like a Five Nights at Freddy's clone. It's rated very positively. It's not that expensive. It says it has full English audio. For those reasons, I think I'll put it on the wish list, but at a certain level, I think we have finally, after many years, gotten away from Five Nights at Freddy's games as an idea, and that potentially has that potentially has eliminated a bunch of games that were Five Nights at Freddy's official games or Five Nights at Freddy's clones. The Five Nights at Freddy's concept never really was a good game concept. It was just something internet people made popular. Here we have a game called Vegas Tales, which looks like it's full motion video of just people sitting on a sofa, and that is not enough really to make a game, in my opinion. Like, even though her story really was just a girl sitting in front of a camera the whole time, I don't think that trick can be done. Let's see, the user reviews here seems to be averaging out to 73%. Came out in December of 2021. I guess no, I would say just the screenshots are not catching your attention here. Like, you wouldn't literally make a game like this if you wanted it to sell. You change the background, you change the chairs. You could have one room where you just rotated the furniture, or put a cover on the furniture, or change that wall papers, and just have it look a little bit different. But I'm not saying any of that, so I'm going to say no to that. That needs more polish than that. It's a video game, so video is a major part of this. Now here's a question as to, do I really want to play a real-time strategy game from a no-name company? Brady University of Applied Science, apparently. Maybe that's a student project. Maybe that's just a made-up publisher name. I think I'm finally having the come to Jesus moment as far as making a decision on real-time strategies at this moment. And at least for this one, I'm going to say no. I think Command and Conquer and maybe a couple of other games in the real-time strategy, StarCraft, things like that, are all I ever want to really play. And I don't want to go deep down the well at all of other kinds of experiences. Here we have an early access game from 2020 as far as a card game. It is rated received very positively. So that puts me in a weird position where I guess I'll just leave Vault of the Void on the fall list and see if it ever comes out of early access, and see how people receive it when it does come out of early access. And yeah, obviously we're at the V's now, so we're getting very much towards the end of the fall list. Here we have another Square Enix JRPG that people are not receiving well, so I mean, this just came out and it's already at 43%, and I'm just going to live with that and remove it at this point. Let's see. Bar Extremis, is this a VR game? No, but it's an early access game from 2021. And it's a VR game. VR spelled V-A-R doesn't make a lot of sense. In a lot of ways, it looks kind of like it's trying to be a Borderlands in VR with zombies instead of psychos. And that kind of could work, but probably wouldn't work because I just don't think anything is going to work in VR. And here we have a physics game that actually looks kind of interesting, but has no relevance. It has a decent amount of visual polish to it. But it's also early access from 2020. And I have to just assume that if something only has 7 user reviews and it's averaging somewhere around 77 according to the SteamDB rating, and it's early access since 2020, this is probably just dead, in part maybe because of the pandemic, but in general just because it's highly unlikely that somebody's going to bother to try and finish what is maybe more of a physics experiment than a game if they are not getting any sales or making any money off of it. Vampirium is over 30 as an RPG hack and slash game. So I guess the question here is this something I really want to play? Or is it a little too dark screenshot syndrome for me? I think it's a little too dark screenshot syndrome. Just a lot of darkness and not a lot to see in the edges around the characters. Feels a little asset flippy. So I'm going to say no to that. Vampire the Masquerade is still in this weird position. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodhunt is mixed in the last 30 days, but mostly positive at 70% otherwise. Inherently, the Vampire the Masquerade series seems to always disappoint, except for maybe the very first Vampire the Masquerade game that people seem to have some love for. So it more than likely is a series where you should only play Vampire the Masquerade. This also is an online PvP game only, that's third-party account requirements. So I'm really seeing a lot of things that would just be big deal breakers for me anyways. But yeah, this came out in April, and it's not doing great really. 70% is not high enough. 64% in the last 30 days for an online only game. A battle royale around Vampire the Masquerade doesn't really make the most sense. And see, one of the other problems here is I definitely recognize that, remember, there was a game that had a lot of trailers that looked something like this, and I'm not sure that there weren't 2 vampire games in a row that I'm confusing in my mind, or if this is the only vampire game. Yeah, I do think there is a different one, a different vampire game that also came out and also failed. But yeah, I guess inherently the idea of battle royales with vampires was probably just a bad idea in general. Valley of the Dead, Malnazidos. Doesn't have any relevancy and has a SteamDB rating of 47%. Although I probably shouldn't lean so heavily into the SteamDB ratings because those ratings seem to be coming out of like some other system that I don't understand. Let's actually look at the game though. Single player only. It's a little low polygon. And with the announcement of the new Alone in the Dark, having this on the wish list doesn't make any sense really, because this is one of those games that I would have said, well, this kind of looks like what an Alone in the Dark game would look like if you made it nowadays. But we now are going to be able just to see what the new Alone in the Dark series is. So, nope to that. And then Valley of No Roads is mixed with only 11 reviews from June 11th, 2021. So we can say no to that. So we have eliminated almost all of the options as far as what were on the fall list. Let's see, RetroArch. Also, I want to point out version 1.11 has been released. A major update has been released. There's a long list of updates and changes around a lot of effects. RetroArch is available on Steam, which keeps everything somewhat nice. Although, arguably, you still kind of need your own separate launcher for playing emulation of old games on Steam, because getting hundreds of old ROMs into Steam is a hassle, well, to say the least. Marvel Snap is not out yet, but it has now got a Steam page, so it will be playable on Steam, and I've already put it on the fall list, which probably should also put it on the wish list too, but whatever. I am going to give this game a chance in early access and we'll play it, but I doubt it's going to replace Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters, despite the problems with Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters. The fast-paced nature of playing games, of the way this card game works in Marvel Snap, just doesn't really feel like a real collectible game, a real trading card game or collectible game that would last in the long run. I think you'll get bored with it fairly fast. And certainly I don't want to play a game that is just going to have black bars on either side and not even be widescreen. So that's definitely going to be a problem. The game that is stealing content, and I reported for stealing content, is still on Steam, although it maybe, yep, still has only 4 user reviews too. So yeah, even though I flagged the game to be taken down, one flag obviously does not cause a game to be taken down on Steam. Not quickly, at least. I imagine me flagging it and saying, hey, this has stolen content, caused them to completely ignore my flag, and they're just waiting until somebody files a DMCA and literally sues them before they actually act on it. Which definitely highlights the potential that there's very few people that are actually looking at the flags on Steam as far as flagging games and actually managing the Steam web store. Alright, I'm going to scroll down my Twitter feed and see if there's any other new news worth mentioning, and then that's going to be it for this stream. We started a little early, so we're ending a little late. Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned it, but there was a 8-bit museum in Florida that got almost all of its inventory ruined by Hurricane Ian. Because one assumes because insurance is so expensive, they're estimating they had about $2 million worth of collectibles or arcade machines. I think it was probably more collectibles, and they only had $150,000 worth of insurance. They were also right on the boardwalk in Florida, and frankly, being anywhere in Florida is probably a crazy place to be to have collectibles, and museums really should be moved more inland. Having anything in Florida is pretty crazy, frankly, because these hurricanes and storms are just continuously going to get worse and worse. We've seen no evidence whatsoever that they're going to get better due to climate change anytime soon. And it gets really pathetic when you have a storm a year or two ago that they say, well, that's the storm of a decade, and then the next year it's the storm of the century, and then they said Hurricane Ian was the storm of 500 years, so the next hurricane will probably be the storm of 1,000 years. They keep saying, well, this is something that only happens once in a decade, once in the 500 years, and really it's just BS platitudes. Nobody knows anything at all as far as predicting storms, and so the only proper assumption to make as far as predicting the weather is to assume it's going to be as bad as you could possibly imagine, if not worse, and respond accordingly. And the only real response I think people can do is that they should, particularly after their homes have already been destroyed or their businesses have already been destroyed, is move. Unfortunately, insurance I think sometimes won't actually allow you to just buy a different house for the same price as the one destroyed in a different location. They just want to build the same house in the exact same place, even though that doesn't make a lot of sense. There is a bit of video game news here. Apparently God of War Ragnarok has been rated by the ESRB, and the FUCK word and SHIT word are heard in the game. As far as, so there's some cuss words in it, which at a certain level that's disappointing, because the God of War series was notoriously known for having sex minigames in its original iteration and being full of violence and gore and blood. And now what is getting pointed out, because it's been so censored and tamed down, is that they're saying a couple of curse words. Like, the entire series has been censored down from being what should have been on the edge of being an adults-only mature game down to being a teen-plus age-rated game. Overwatch 1 is officially a dead game, for whatever that matters. Like, Overwatch 1 has been shut down effectively for Overwatch 2, and people aren't super enthusiastic around Overwatch 2 and its different way of doing things. I'm still scrolling down my Twitter feed, but I think I've pretty much seen everything. Yeah, somebody made a custom Dying Light 2 Lego minifig here, but this is just a Lego fan doing this. It's not an official Lego set. Almost certainly you would not seen Lego get into selling a Dying Light 2 set with bloody zombie minifigs. If anything, I imagine Lego this year, for the rest of the year, is going to mostly just try and keep everything fairly the same, because this is, in a lot of ways, feels like it's a rebuilding year for Lego, where they've removed a lot of products and stopped making a lot of products, and they're basically, I think, trying to set up for big releases in the next year and raising the prices in general. Like, the general concept I imagine for Lego is that they wanted to raise the prices on the things they still are selling so they could sell less things, so they could have less variety in their manufacturing facility. There is also a movement towards plastic packaging, paper bags instead of plastic packaging, which, with a new lineup and a new, maybe one or two new series of ideas of Lego sets, we may see them move to paper bags. Like, I imagine they still will have Lego City, but I don't know if they're going to keep on with Monkey Kid or Ninjago, if they're still even doing Ninjago. And I think they kind of have to stick with Lego Friends, but I wouldn't be surprised if they de-emphasize Lego Friends sets somewhat too. And the licensed properties. We'll probably see still some more Nintendo stuff, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see less other licensed random stuff. We didn't get quite as far as I would like to get with this, and I'm just gonna hold on to this dual and solo mode for the next 27 days, I guess, just so I don't get a duplicate dual and solo mode. Alright, well, that's gonna be it for this stream. Back to work, I suppose, after this with Zero Time Dilemma. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me, there's a bunch of social media links down below, and there's a link to Patreon where you could support me further, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.